So hello and welcome. Happy Friday. This is Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers, episode number 285. I'm Frederick Dunn, and this is The Way to Bee. So I'm really glad that you're here today. Glad I'm here today. We're in the middle of a snowstorm still. The blizzard's gone. Our blizzard conditions have gone away. I know you're wondering what's going on. What are we going to talk about today? Well, look down in the video description and you'll see all the topics in order. The other thing is, you might be wondering how to submit your own topic for consideration in a future episode of The Way to Bee, which, by the way, happens to be a podcast as well, so you can just Google it, The Way to Bee podcast, and listen while you drive, or maybe you're stuck in a snowstorm and you're in a big line of traffic and you can't go anywhere, so you might as well just listen to Backyard Beekeeping. So, as I mentioned, the weather. Heavy snow, the series that you just saw in the opening of today's video, those for video this morning. So that's what's going on outside right now. I was allowed outside for a little while and I cleared the driveway. So the mail people and the FedEx and UPS, all these people are having to get through these back roads around here. We have had 28 inches of snow accumulation. Think about that. So anyway, it is 23.5 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and in Celsius, that's -5. And the wind right now, 7.5 miles per hour, which is 12 kilometers per hour. And where am I talking about? The state of Pennsylvania, northwestern part of the state, the snow belt. So when you're looking at national weather, they're talking about all the problems that people are having. That's where I am, dead center, right in the middle of it. So 98% relative humidity, no big surprise there, and 55 mile per hour wind gusts is what we got yesterday. They promised us up to 60, so I guess that still qualifies. It's up to 60. We didn't get 60. And I'm not complaining, and you might be wondering, Fred, 55 miles per hour, what's that in kilometers? 88.5 kilometers per hour. So if you want to know how to submit your own topic, go to thewaytobee.org. Click on the page marked The Way to Bee. There's a form there. You can fill it out. You can stay anonymous. You didn't even have to admit who you are, as long as you're saying nice things. I appreciate that. You can have a question, or you can just bring something to my attention that you think might be interesting to backyard beekeepers. I don't want you to think also that backyard beekeeping is just for beginners, because it isn't. There are some very sophisticated, very experienced backyard beekeepers that watch this. So I want to thank you for being here. And that's because often my listeners and viewers provide information and responses that I depend on too to keep me sharp. I like to be challenged and questioned. If I say something and you think that's nonsense, let me know in the most polite possible way. So I think I'm going to jump right into it and get to the very first question of the day, which comes from Ernest, L-R-E-L-A-N. That's the YouTube name. It says, watch all the time, like your investigations. And P.S., I was a film editor for the United States Marine Corps. So that's cool, and thank you for your service. Lots of veterans out there. But the thing was, this comment is relevant to another YouTube that I put out a while ago. If you want to know about the North American Honeybee Expo and vendors and items and things that might be there, or just what the environment might be like, just go to my YouTube page, which is Frederick Dunn, F-R-E-D-E-R-I-C-K, Dunn, and type in Honeybee Expo. And you'll see the video. It shows a lot of vendors there. One of the vendors, and that's why this question came up, was about a smokeless smoker, or a flameless smoker. And we all know Apisalis is one, but that's more of a vape system. This is an actual smoker, and I was on the list to review it, to give my feedback. It had its own pellets. It was self-extinguishing. It was a very well-made smoker. It had a battery pack on it and had a glow plug built into it. So when you turned it on, it heated up. And while it was heating, while the glow plug was on, it would burn. It would smoke. And then the minute you turn it off, disconnect the battery, it was off and there was no more flame. So it came from a part of the world where they weren't allowed to have flames at all. Fire risk was so high that they had to have a flameless smoker system. So it seemed great, really well made. They sent me a unit. I was supposed to review it, and then I got a notification from them. Hold off, we have some bugs in the system, we have to work it out. So, and it came in tubs. I don't know if you recall this, if you want to look at it. Again, of course, they talked about the coating, so there were different scents associated. So the smell of the pellets that were burning would be pleasing to the beekeeper, and then the response from the bees, of course, was also supposed to be good. Never hit the market. They had 3 attempts. So right now, the only smokeless smoker for your bees, which sounds ironic, is Apisolis, which is more of a vaping system. Apisolis is what it goes by. It's a battery-powered unit too. Only theirs actually works right now. It doesn't mean that other unit is not going to make its way into the hands of beekeepers, but they have some bugs to work out. So that's to answer this question. And glad to have it. Sorry, it never hit it. Next question, question number 2, comes from Nigel Moore. By the way, before I go on with this question, some of you read CC on the videos. And so I catch a comment every now and again that if only it were in this language or that language. If you are trying to read it, like English is not your first language, and maybe you want to read it in your own language where you are, make a note, write down in the comment section of the video, please put this in Hindi, or please put this in French, and I'll do it for you. I'll create a CC in your language. So just let me know, and I'll take care of that right away. So here's Nigel Moore's question. Can you please tell me if wild bees carry the Varroa destructor mite, and if so, why does it not wipe them out? I ask this because they're not being treated to combat the mite. Thank you. So for Nigel, thank you for the question. This comes up all the time. This is something that is near and dear to me as a beekeeper, because the last thing I want to be doing is treating my bees. So I'm in the state of Pennsylvania, as I already mentioned. There's a lot of research going on in this state, and we collaborate with other states, with entomology departments from other universities all over. So Penn State is what I'm talking about for research like this. And even my bee club, the Northwest Pennsylvania Beekeepers Association, gets involved in genetics. I'm not really powerful in genetics because, of course, I don't have a lot of colonies. That doesn't mean we can't engage with best practices when it comes to beekeeping. So, and this comes up, if we only left them alone, they would be fine. Well, for those of you who don't know, by the way, honeybees did exist here in the state of Pennsylvania, native honeybees, by the way, but we only know about them through fossil remains. So it's clear they didn't make it, but I don't know, maybe that was unfair to make that comparison because they weren't obviously taken out from the Varroa destructor mite. Honeybees have faced challenges. The Varroa destructor mite is what we're talking about the most today, and what I personally talk about the least when I give a beekeeping presentation, because that ground is so well covered. So they looked at bee trees, unattended bees. The most famous reference to honeybees that are not maintained, that are left to themselves just to see what shakes out. Dr. Thomas Seeley, the Arnott Forest in the state of New York, right here in the United States. When the Varroa destructor mite came out, it was devastating to beehives. Devastating to bee colonies, and the losses were skyrocketing. They've had challenges before. There was the tracheal mite at one time. American foul brood was terrible, still is, but not very prevalent. European foul brood, pretty darn challenging and attacks the brood. And then we have a whole slew of viruses. So now we've got this vector of viruses known as the Varroa destructor mite, which is brought to us from other countries. It wasn't here. Just like up until recently, it wasn't even in Australia. And I think that in Australia, for example, there were a lot of challenges to the very idea of treating. Their treatment method initially in Australia when it showed up was to kill any bees that have it. That did not work. So, and I've said this often, and I stick with it now, the future in honeybees is really genetics. That gets tossed on its head frequently, and the reason is We need our bees to do things that yield huge income, which puts honeybees right on the map because they impact our Department of Agriculture on a national scale. Honeybees as pollinators produce, of course, help us produce vegetables and fruits and all kinds of things that really need pollinators, and honeybees are the top pollinators because they're most easily managed. You'll hear frequently people say that, native bees out-pollinate honeybees. 1-to-1, you bet they do. However, we put out 20, 30,000 honeybees in an area, so we are outperforming by numbers alone. So the honeybee is perfectly adapted as a pollinator. The reason I'm saying this is the only reason the U.S. Department of Agriculture really cares about the honeybee is because of its impact on our gross products when it comes to agriculture, right? Because if this was just a little insect zipping around, it wouldn't get this kind of attention. There wouldn't be a bunch of treatments for it. And the genetics are all kind of muddied up, right? So for 40 years, Thomas Seeley observed that feral colonies in the Arnott Forest took a major hit, of course, but then balanced themselves out without being attended to by people. However, that seems overly simple, and it is. We have kind of genetic wars going on in the United States because depending on what you want from your bees, you're going to focus on those genetics. Well, honeybees that handle the Varroa destructor mite well often are very small size colonies, which is true of the Arnott Forest. If you looked at the space, which Dr. Thomas Seeley evaluated in great detail, it averaged about 11 gallons. Now, some of you might be looking at gallons and thinking, what is that in liters? 42 liters while we're talking. So small colonies did really well. Now, one of the things that happens when you keep your bees in small colonies, they're in small spaces, and so we know that they cycle out, they replace their queens, they swarm a lot. If they swarm a lot, there's a lot of reproduction, and of course, then they are reducing the mite load because they've reduced the amount of brood. So the other part of that is, what if we wanted large colonies of bees to get more pollination going, because that's how business works. If a little bit works really well and is profitable, then a lot must be really good. So then in the commercial industry, they have making the grade, grading your colonies. So you need a minimum number of frames of brood and a bee population that's going to get you top dollar when they go to the most famous pollination thing that's going to come up here in February, the almond groves in California. More than 80% of the world's almonds are produced right here in the United States. That makes it a huge cash crop, which means what? There's a lot of interest from the Department of Agriculture, and therefore those who want to make money from bees are going to provide for pollination services. Now, the backyard beekeeper, and I preface today's thing, backyard beekeepers aren't always beginners. We just like to keep our bees small scale, keep them static. We don't migrate them around, not a sideliner. So it doesn't mean you can't make a little money from your bees, but it means that we're not loading them in trucks and things like that, which is an advantage. Why? Because you'll hear reference to regionally adapted. Bees adapted to your climate. So, and I raise mutts. You'll hear that a lot. So that means we've allowed them to hybridize, and we selectively split and multiply from colonies that are performing the best in our environment. Now, that doesn't mean that it's one of those beehives that's going to have 7 supers on it by the end of summer. My colonies, where I am, are very small. They're very successful. I tried to go treatment-free completely. So I thought that was working great, but then I got a little bit concerned because every once in a while I'd get a big spike. And of course, like a lot of people that are science-based, and I am, you'll read a study that shows that one colony in your backyard apiary that gets overrun with Varroa destructor mites can have a domino effect on the rest of your bees. And that did happen once in a while. You get one colony a little bit out of control, because even though I was treatment-free for 10 years, it doesn't mean I was ignoring the bees. I was an active treatment-free person. So The other thing was I pulled in genetics that were known to survive treatment-free. You'll hear initials like VSH. VSH, Varroa sensitive hygienic bee stock. That is one of the traits that when a bee finds out that there are Varroa in the capped pupa of a developing bee, they'll uncap it. And they can dry it out, and they'll either pull out the developing pupa, or they just dry out the mite, and in some cases they cap it back, and in some cases they don't even finish capping it back, and that bee finishes development. The mites cannot be exposed to air like that. So I reached out to people that had survivor line stock. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you're a backyard beekeeper and we can't do this genetic development on our own on any scale, really, that makes a big impact, we can certainly support the breeders that have the stock that is showing that, right? So when we use the Arnott Forest as a model of bees in feral colonies that are surviving means that the honeybees are still out there. It does not necessarily mean that those colonies would be useful or scalable when it comes to pollinating crops. The other thing is you need everybody on board with their practices in order to allow those genetics to ultimately prevail. In the meantime, what would that mean economically? A profound slam to the business of beekeeping, right? So the commercial scale beekeeper, if you're one of those people, last thing you want to do is just turn them all loose and say, let's see what we get at the end. When you look at the almond board, in other words, these are people that number crunch, talk about what goes on. Are they meeting the pollination requirements for the almonds? And what's the condition of the colonies coming in? And what's the condition of the colonies leaving? Last February, so that's this year, this past February, 30% of colonies that were actively participating in almond pollination expired. They died. So coming out of almonds is not great for bees. Almonds themselves as a pollination service is fantastic for the beekeeper, but they don't get enough nectar and pollen to keep those bees going. So they have to be fed and cared for and looked after. And even then, 30% loss is a pretty big deal. And that's the pollen board, or that's the almond board. That's not, beekeepers saying, hey, my bees have trouble. But you can bet when beekeepers lose their bees, they get compensated for that. So each colony, for example, state of Pennsylvania, let's say you're a commercial beekeeper or a sideliner, and you lose 70-80% of your colonies. You get compensated for each colony loss through the Department of Agriculture. So once again, business kicks in and shores it up. If we're just going to go with survivors, and they had this great study that was going to go on through Penn State, and we're going to look at just bees that are in trees, bees that are in cavities in trees, and we're just going to not meddle with them, collect samplings from the foragers, observe them through several years, several seasons, and see how it goes. So who was doing the study? Well, there was a tie-in with the survivability of untreated colonies through Louisiana State University. Professor Kristen Neely here. And what they found out was the genetics, right? They have these bees called Poline, P-O-L, Tech, L-I-N-E. And those are VSH bees. So what they did is they did observations of these bees compared with commercial stock bees, right? And they just started not treating them. So treatment-free, and this is a study that you can look up, 62% survival. That's not very good for a top-of-the-line Poline bee stock, right? But that is 60% survival. When they took the commercial lines of bees down there, and they did not treat them through the winter, or at the end of the summer and through the winter, they had 3% survival. Not good. And you might argue that, yeah, but what if we kept that 3%? 3 hives out of every 100, and then we kept going with them. Well, Penn State did similar studies too, where they just allowed these bees to die or live and the treatment-free stock by the end of the third year was gone. So if you don't have any bees that are making it, then in the end, you potentially could lose them all. So the other thing was, if they treated them, you got 56% survival for the commercial line of bees, which is, again, that doesn't sound very good to me. And the genetics, the PO line, tied with being treated. And they didn't say what the treatment was, by the way, in that particular study. I'm sure there's some extended version of it that explains every detail of it. 72% survival for the already resistant PO line stock. So that's kind of explains what I did too, because I had been treatment free for a while, but I was still losing bees, but not in big percentages. I was losing maybe 30%, 40% sometimes. And when oxalic acid, which is an organic treatment, came out, I decided, what if I tried that? Kind of like what was going on with the PO line here, where it jumped in survival from 62% to 72%, 10% survival. Then I thought, wow, if I treat it with oxalic acid, maybe I'll get a higher survival rate, and I did. And I still practice kind of a hybrid of treatment and treatment-free. And that's because the colonies are doing extremely well that have very low mite counts. I don't treat those. Those that have higher mite counts, I do treat those with oxalic acid vaporization. And then I just don't reproduce or expand my apiary from the colonies that don't do well. So I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm trying to explain the trees that we identified to follow to see how they were doing on their own. Every tree in my area died out on its own. So then I didn't have anything to work with. And that's just me. So there was a wider study that was done. Feral colonies, Pennsylvania. So this is Penn State University, and it was headed up by Dr. Margarita Lopez Uribe, right? And in 1987, most feral colonies died off completely. They're studying colonies now. In 2017, they sampled over 20 colonies, which, by the way, that's not a very big number. But in 2017, they sampled over 20 colonies to see what their virus loads were and things like that, to see if there's a correlation. Lower virus load, greater survivability, smaller colonies. And as of March of 2023, so March 24th, they're currently being analyzed still. So we couldn't find a study that even showed what the final findings were. And just myself in my county, whenever I come across people, because I'm meeting people all the time, because I also happen to be a portrait photographer and people like to have their pictures taken on their property in the woods. And so we find feral colonies while we're doing pictures, and I go, oh my gosh, would it be okay if I came back and followed up with this colony of bees in this bee tree? So I ended up with a bunch of bee trees that I just could come and check up on. Not one of those trees remained occupied for 2 years. Not one of them. So there again, where I am. Now, what if that was my total study? What if I somehow had a grant, and which I don't, but let's say I did, and I could just go and find all these colonies. I could put the word out through social media. If there's a bee tree in your yard, on your property, somebody you know, let me know. I'll come out there, and we won't meddle with them. We'll just observe and see if they swarm. If they're ever empty and then get reoccupied, because that's what I feel probably happens a lot when people say that tree right there has been occupied with bees since I was 10 and I'm 52 now. You'll find out that they frequently cycle out completely. In other words, they could have died through the winter. And then when spring rolls around, wax moths fly in there, and then the wax worms chew up all that residue and then create a bunch of detritus on the bottom. And then what happens? A swarm comes in and finds a cavity that still smells great, even though now all the wax worms are gone because they did their job. They recycled old brood comb and old honeycomb. And then a new colony moves in and builds it back up. And then you show up the first week of July and go, see, they're still there. Look at that. So unless you have meaningful monitoring, and I was using an endoscope so that I could go right in and see what's going on in there. You can also, if you're an experienced beekeeper, is the comb new? Is it old? Is it, old brood comb? What's the detritus at the bottom look like? Well, there again, I just want to say, long story short, none of those colonies are alive right now. Last year, we had an extended dearth period, had a fantastic spring, get to midsummer, and then to the end of the year, we had such low rainfall that there were challenges for the bees. But so there's very little evidence that 100% treatment-free and hands-off beekeeping is going to be a workable thing for you to be doing. You risk losing everything, and you risk having varroa mites out of control. Now, on the flip side of that, if you had small colonies, let's say you just set up a bank of nucleus hives. That's too small. Let's ramp it up. Let's make it a double stack. So we have what would be a single brood box, 10 deep frames, but it's in 5/5, and you just left it there. Made a study out. Treat that like your treatment-free tree. So then you could populate all of those. But see, now we've messed with them already, okay? Because when we're beekeepers, we're messing with our bees by what we keep them in, and now it's a managed colony. It's not truly a feral colony of bees. So we've got them in a man-made box, and now we have to follow the rules of the forest. So the other part of that is, because remember, the standard that gets constantly brought up to us, if you're trying to create a platform to build your treatment-free policies on, you look at the Arnott Forest, but you have to think, how far apart are all of those colonies of bees? Well, they're like a quarter mile apart. So most of us don't have the land to spread out your beehives a quarter mile from one another. So these are other things that play in how well the stock survives. So in a backyard environment, if you've got 10 colonies of bees and you only live on an acre, you've already violated what's going to help you observe bees that live and let live kind of management practice, right? So there are management things that tell us, going back to Dr. Seeley, keep your colonies as far apart as you can, still under your control. And you would be keeping your colonies small if you're going to go treatment-free. And I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying that it's active management. So there again, and he recommends, Dr. Seeley recommends culling colonies that demonstrate disease or overwhelming parasitic loads. So the parasite in this case is the Varroa destructor mite. If you're not willing to do all of that, and you just want bees on your property, and you just want to stare at them from a distance and just feel like they'll probably work it out, or let's say you're more scientific, you want to do a test. And let's say I did this. Let's say this spring, I go out into my apiary and I say, live or die, do what you're going to do. And then I just start taking notes to see how they make it. How embarrassing by the end of the year, the following year, or the most likely scenario is by the end of the third year of treatment-free, I'd be lucky to have a single colony out there. And the reason is, my bees are not just being replenished by my own bees. I would love it if that were the case. If they flew out and engaged with other bees that come from survivor stock. And then so my queens fly out, they mate with drones from survivor stock only. That is not feasible anymore where I live. And that's because there are a lot of beekeepers, there are a lot of new beekeepers. So the first thing they do is they buy a package of bees from somewhere, or they buy a nucleus of bees that's come up from the south. And I'm not saying that there's something wrong with southern bees, but I'm saying that we're looking at this study here that I quoted, Poline bees versus standard commercial stock. Most of the bees that people buy packages of are commercial line bees. You'll get a lot of Italian genetics and things like that. They require treatment. You can't just bring them up here and turn them loose. You'll get great honey for the first year and a half, 2 years. You get a lot of productivity. You'll have huge clusters of bees, brood-wise, going into wintertime that you'll have to feed because they're a warm weather, warm climate bee, right? Most of the commercial stock is this way. And then if you're just going to turn them loose on their own, I think you're going to find it's kind of heartbreaking. And you're going to get a lot of criticism, by the way, which some people don't mind. There are beekeepers. There are treatment-free beekeepers that, let's be honest, just don't tell the truth about their survivorship, right? The stock that makes it. Pride gets in the way of science sometimes, and people will frequently say that, they had all this survivability and everything, but then you talk to somebody else, like, yeah, wasn't it terrible that so-and-so lost 6 out of 8 of their colonies of bees? And then you're thinking back, wait a second, that person at a meeting said, I have 100% survival. So what happens is people get stuck and the pride gets in the way and they don't want to say, and I'm not saying every treatment-free beekeeper is like that. I'm just saying it's hard to find people to stay honest about what they're actually having going on, because we equate success in beekeeping to not so much what you're learning, which has a huge amount of value, but the success of beekeeping is how much honey you got off of that hive. Well, if you're keeping small colonies, you're not getting a large amount of honey. And how many of your bees survived, winter? So there again, good beekeeper, bad beekeeper. And so this is a very complicated thing, and there is an entire nation that does not treat their bees. Where do you think that is? It's Cuba. I want to know more about Cuban bees, but there again, let's check out that environment. The environment of Cuba is much different than here in the northeastern United States, for example. So climate plays heavy. The other thing is the stock needs to be allowed to just die off and live, and it's a very tiny percentage that will live, and then you need to be able to work with those without being impeded by other beekeepers that are bringing in stock that cannot manage itself in your area. Even big beekeepers that have done studies, they had mite-free. I think even, let's talk, Bob Binney had a huge colony. Bob lends his bees to science frequently, Bob Binney. And University of Georgia does studies on his hives and things like that. And I think they were trying to do varroa mite tests and counts and things like that. And he had an outyard that was a sizable outyard, and they were varroa free. In other words, there was a problem because they didn't have the varroa mites to conduct their study on. So if you don't have the varroa mite, you couldn't do the study. Well, then some time passed. I don't know exactly how much. But next thing you know, it turned into having huge varroa loads. And they were scratching their heads wondering what the heck is going on there. So it sounded like they had some genetics really dialed in. Because heaven forbid you fail because you don't have enough varroa so that you can do a test, right? So you can do a study. That's the kind of good news that you want. Bad news for scientific research if your goal is to take out varroa mites. But then what they found out then, of course, is a bunch of bees that are unmanaged because somebody was older and was ill and wasn't able to take care of their apiary anymore. So there were bees left on their own in that vicinity that then impacted what otherwise was a parasite-free outyard of bees. So the model really demonstrates that bees should be managed and you should know what's going on in those hives. Just, we used to have a big sign up in an engineering department on a ship that I was in, and it said, you get what you inspect, not what you expect. And that, I didn't think that was a great slogan, but it's true when it comes to bees and livestock under your care. If you don't know what's going on, you can't kind of make claims that they're doing extremely well. I guess the long-term goal is to have bees that can tolerate mites and some of the pathogens that they carry. We have a multi-pronged approach. It's called integrated pest management. So if you're going treatment-free, for those of you who have made that decision, do everything else you can to help passively control those mites while your bees build themselves up somehow. So screen bottom boards, maybe pulling out drone brood and things like that at the right time. There are a whole bunch of things that you would need to do. Split your colonies, make brood breaks, all these other things. I would say that that's advanced beekeeping. It's not beginner beekeeping. Moving on to question number 3. This comes from Rusnow, Rusnow. That is the YouTube channel name. Any advice on having an observation hive inside your home? I read lack of moisture can be an issue. Any blueprints or ideas for the ideal observation hive? I have lots of ideas, sketches and plans and drawings for the ideal observation hive. Ideal for who? Ideal for me, that's who. And the best observation hive that I have right now was actually made by Ricky Rourke of horizontalbees.com, and he's going to be at the North American Honeybee Expo. Check him out. He makes a lot of horizontal hives, but he also built my observation hive to spec, including safety glass instead of plexi and things like that. So what's ideal for me and what I want out of it is the ability to observe the bees, photograph them, and everything else. I also want to make acoustic recordings. So I want to record sounds inside the hive, so I have a configured hive just for that. But the thing here is, the question is, I heard they have a lack of moisture, that can be an issue. I don't think lack of moisture is much of an issue, really. So I would need to know more about why someone had problems with moisture on that hive. So if you had an observation hive, let's say, this observation hive is kept indoors in a warm, heated space. That's why you have observation hives in libraries and science centers and things like that. I used to go to a pancake house in Illinois that actually had a big observation hive right in the store that was part of the restaurant. So while you were waiting for your table, you could go stare at bees, which I did when I was in 3rd and 4th grade. So anyway, you can create condensation inside your observation hive even when it's in a warm, heated space. Here's how. I've been paying attention because I'm wanting to do other things with other observation hives. So one of the things that came up was, how long could we make the entrance to the observation hive? A lot of observation hives, a lot of mine are just mounted directly to the wall, and there's maybe 6 to 10 inches of space. So the entrance into the hive, the channel going out, because I have different diameter channels because I want to see does one work better than the other, that kind of thing. And does that have any impact on how close they produce brood to the entrance and things like that? And I got to talking with other people that were experts on these entrances for the bees, and there are observation hive entrances that are really long. Why do I bring that up? Well, because if your hive is right up against the bulkhead, right up against the wall, and you have standard 2x4, then sheathing and dry rock, drywall, sheetrock. So if you have that, and then here's your hive, then the entrance is right there. And then there may be some kind of landing board on the outside of the structure, and I'm sure you've put that on a south-facing wall, that kind of thing, south or east. Anyway, one of the ways to get your bees moisture, because that's the question. I paid attention to a science center that I recently visited, and I was looking at the observation hive, and they had a bunch of vent holes in the entrance. It had a really long extended entrance, which I thought was really cool because students could sit down and see the bees coming and going. You get to see it from inside. Are they carrying pollen? Are they carrying propolis? What are they doing? And sometimes they were stopping even in that channel and doing trophallaxis. For those of you who don't know what that is, they're transferring the nectar that they're collecting, or water in some cases, right to an interior bee that meets them there before they even get into the hive. That's because they have this really long entrance tube. And so these exchanges would happen where people can stare at them. So I was thinking about that too. And then when the tube goes outside, it's usually flush with the building that it's on. And I would suggest that if you're concerned about moisture and the bees' access to it, I would extend that tube, and I would make it a pretty small diameter tube, by the way. 1 inch diameter would be fine. Most of these are like shop dust collection diameters, 2-inch diameter, 2.5-inch diameter, nice big tubes, right? If you reduce that diameter, you reduce airflow through it, and the bees can still manage well. But what happens is, eventually, if the tube extended past the face of the building front, it would be cold and exposed to the air this time of year right now, with temperatures in the 20s outside. So what would happen? The entire tube on its way into the hive would hit a point where it's warm and dry. It would also hit a point on its way out where it would obtain the dew point. And the dew point is the surface temperature on the interior that causes moisture in the air to condense, and you've got moisture on the interior surface. So the reason I say for this question is I would extend my entrance tube 6 inches out from the face of the building, and now I've got a channel that bees travel through until they encounter moisture without having to encounter the great outdoors. It also gives your bees that are being kept in your nice warm 69 degree Fahrenheit space, whatever your internal temperatures are for your observation hive, Mine are all in an unheated building anyway, so this doesn't happen like that. But if you had that tube out there, now the bees would go down and just get moisture from the interior of the tube and not be exposed to that wind gust that would blow them right off the landing board. Because what's coming up this coming week here where I live in the state of Pennsylvania, be different for you, but we're going to have a lot of moisture. We're going to see bees coming out and getting drinks because snow is about to melt. But so by having that extended tube, you've got condensation. I also like, even though they're really expensive, the translucent or even transparent tubes, right? Really structurally solid like Schedule 40. And then that way you'll be able to observe where the bees are stopping and what they're doing, and you'll see that they can get their moisture there. Because it comes up from time to time, people will say, hey, I want to put water inside my beehive. And I always say, please don't do that. The reason is your bees may need to dry out the hive. Look what's going on right now. I think we have 98 or 99% relative humidity. If you put a water reservoir inside the hive, then now you've got a challenge. So let's give you a second option to that extended entrance going from your observation hive to the outdoors. You could run another tube through the bottom of your observation hive and have that tube go out to nothing but a water feeder. So that could have a sponge that constantly soaks up water because bees will put their tongue on the sponge and get that, and that reduces like the airflow, the humidity. You don't want a big open water surface that your bees then might be trying to dehumidify. So you could do that, and then the bees could go and drink and bring that right in. And you want that to be really nice, super filtered water if you could, because it's for your bees inside the hive. There's room for experimentation, but that tube to the outside on cold days will work. Try it. And on that science building that I was looking at that had the vent holes in it, you could close the vent holes. And of course, condensation forms. That's why the vent holes are in those transparent pipes, because they need students to be able to see it. So I also took notes on that. Have the vents, close them off if you don't need them, and then condensation could form, and then you could see bees drinking. You could also see the transition and teach students about dew point. So super interesting stuff. That was question number 3. Moving on to question number 4. Comes from McCorne, M-C-O-R-N-E. That's the YouTube channel name. And 3 questions it says here. Will bees take fondant that has dried? Number 2, what keeps fondant above the inner cover from freezing? 3, if fondant freezes on the hive, does it matter? And of course, fondant that you make yourself, I don't know what the parameters are. Hive Alive fondant, I have access to Dara Scott, who's the founder, the head guy at Hive Alive. He says don't freeze the fondant. And I'm thinking, much like this question is, yeah, but here where we live, because remember that's developed in Ireland, where we live, it's 23 degrees, 25 degrees, 21 degrees. The fondant's on top of the inner cover. We have double bubble over the top of it. I have an insulated outer cover. And the chances of it freezing it's pretty possible to get to freezing there. But of course, if later in the year, as the cluster's more towards the top, less chance of freezing there. But let's say it did. What's the detriment? He just said, try not to freeze it. So I don't know what the detriment is. I would think freezing would preserve stuff instead of damage it. So I know that when it gets really hot, it gets damaged. So in other words, it should never go over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So I will answer some of these questions. That wasn't a very strong question about what happens when it freezes. I want to know more about that. But when it's dried. And so this happens. I forgot a couple of these on some beehives this year. I kept meaning to take them off, but they were placeholders, and so they were the same fondant that had been on through last winter was still there in the month of July. Then when I picked it up, see how workable this is. This is really flexible. It's basically in a liquid, but I have found this fondant turns almost a pale white and just off-white, and it's really firm then. So would the bees take it? I mean, they might. Clearly, they were on a colony that didn't use it fast enough and really didn't need it. So I took it off, and then I took it apart to see if I could just dissolve that in 120-degree water. Why did I do that and not heat it up and boil water and really mix it up? Because aside from whatever happens if you freeze it, I don't know what that is, but if you overheat it, we definitely damage some of the benefits that are in here. So if it's in a semi-solid state, if it starts to feel like dried out Play-Doh, then you can mix that with warm water and it goes into solution really easily, and now you just made a liquid feed that you can give back to your bees. That's what I do with it. So if I find one that's really rigid, remember it's on a colony that's not using it up then either. So they don't need it. I can just put the plug back in and get it off of there. Depending on the time of year, by the way, that was my mistake again on that colony, but I hadn't supered it or I would have seen the fondant pack. So what it was is one of those underdog colonies that I didn't think was going to make it, so I wasn't even really looking at the inside, and so I had a fondant pack in there that was all dried out but could be turned into solution again. So they would eat it, it's just really slow going, and they need a lot of moisture to do it. So the previous question about water. They need access to water in winter, even to metabolize their stored honey. So everything that they want to consume that's available in wintertime is going to require a lot of water use. That's why another vote for not venting off all of the humidity and moisture inside a hive through a top vent going through winter, because they need the moisture. Also, that dew point that I talked about on the tube, if you're venting through the top, the dew point is achieved up above. And so now we get frosty areas on the fringe of whatever, like people use pillows and quilt boxes and things like that. The top area of that should be super frosty, and then there should be a transition to some moisture, and then a transmission to just being dry and warm. And I'm not a fan personally of quilt boxes. It doesn't mean if you've got a bunch of them and you like them and they're working and your bees are living, that's great. Moisture defeats insulation. So moving on from that, so you can mix it up. It's still good. You can use it. And I would just, if the bees needed it and for some reason, you use an older pack of fondant or something, by the way, that has an expiration date on it, they're good for 2 years. If it's past the expiration date, you might think about swapping that out. So that's also why I don't recommend buying a whole bunch of them and stockpiling them if you don't need them. I already have backups for the colonies that I think are going to need fondant, and they're ready to go. I'm not going to buy a bunch more and have them on the shelf and just let them get older and maybe firmer. So, but you can dissolve them. Bees, if you have a lot of water, they can still take it, but I would replace it with a fresh one, personally. Just that's what I would do. Question number 5. John Gardner, that's the YouTube channel name. My request for a future topic: how to accurately weigh beehives. I get this question a lot. Weighing beehives, for me personally, because we have members of our bee club, and when you talk to people that they want to show you their cell phone and it has all this data from all the broodminder data that they have. The most common and the most frequently encountered scale for beehives comes from Broodminder. So if you can just Google Broodminder and look at the Broodminder scale and things like that, you get an idea of what's out there. The thing of it is, the Broodminder scale, it's in a triangle-shaped thing. Anyway, it's like there's a cantilever to it. I had a lot of questions about the Broodminder that still kind of are unanswered. But my question for you is, some people just like tech, and that's okay. You can do it. They'll come complete with instructions on exactly how to set up your Broodminder. Remember, it has to report its findings. It has to report its information. Now, there are old school mechanical scales that you can tote around and lift a whole hive and see where it's at, and then you go through and you could lift it again, and you can use a motor lift if you wanted to, something like that, to lift an entire hive and just put one of those heavy-duty weight scales on it, because I've got those dial-type scales. I've got spring scales, but I wasn't using them to weigh entire hives. I was weighing frames of honey to get a feel for, how much is a Layens frame full of capped honey weigh compared to a Langstroth deep frame full of capped honey. And, of course, the depth of the cells and all that plays, but that's the only thing I wanted to weigh and find out what's going on. And you could do that just like holding up a trout or a steelhead or whatever that you're trying to find out what it weighs, those are easy to do. Weighing the entire hive, my question for you is, what do you want to know? In other words, do we want to know if they had a sudden weight gain? Do we want to know if they swarmed? Do we want to know if they've consumed all their honey all of a sudden? And then you'll get this readout on your phone on the 27th of January that, your hive is light. Now, what would you would go out and put on emergency feed, I suppose. But these are things that can be figured out just by you. And by the way, I know somebody's sitting there wanting to go shopping. So when I looked up the Broodminder digital hive scales, I found it, it doesn't say here. I think it's Foxhound. Is it Foxhound or Foxhound Bee Supply? With the digital hive scale, so you get a Broodminder sensor that will tell you temperature. There's another sensor that will do temp and humidity, so it's whichever one you want. Bundled with the digital hive scale is $239.99. You can also get them at Better Bee, they sell them. So I looked around to see what they're selling for. But you know what I really wanted to see was feedback. I wanted to see customer feedback. So ratings and things like that. And there wasn't one. So, darn it. Anyway, my point for you is, unless money is really burning a hole in your pocket, why do you want to lift a hive to know what it weighs right now? Because the variances, when I ask people that show me their apps on their phones and things like that, I was like, wow, that is a lot of data, which I personally wouldn't even have the time to number crunch. I'm sure it transfers to your computer or something. Now you can do a spreadsheet. Now you can know you can have the ups and downs of the weights and stuff day and night. Like when there's a nectar flow on, they bring in all this moist nectar, they dehydrate it so it goes down. Then the weight goes up again when they bring in more nectar the following day. And then all of a sudden they're bringing in water. And all of a sudden there's a bunch of new bees and things like that. There's a swarm. So you lost 5 pounds or something if it's a big swarm. What would you do with all of this information? Is it going to be helpful to you? So if you're doing a scientific study, I suppose that would be important for your charts and graphs to give your findings. So if you're a student, you're in college, you're studying entomology, and you need exact data for things like that, I could see it. But if you just want to know, let's tip the hive. Let's see how solid that one feels, because it's really obvious once you start tipping hives and you start feeling for how heavy they are. You'll really know when one's in trouble. It's distinctive. You get all these, they feel like they're full of clay. They're so dense and so heavy. And then you get one, it just tips really easy. Whoa, they're in trouble. So then the question is, why are they in trouble? And what would a hive scale, could I put one of these on every hive? No, it's designed to sit under a hive and stay there. So at what time of year do you need to use it? Like, is there a foot of snow on the ground, 2 feet, 3 feet of snow on the ground, and you're going to go out there and do what with your hives when they're light or heavy? I don't know. So I'm saying is work it out. What do you want to get out of it? I'm interested, if you're listening right now or you're watching, please put a comment down in the comment section what you found valuable about being able to have a digital, absolute running weight of your hives. In other words, what time of year was that important? And at what time did having that digital advantage, that tech advantage, save a colony? Or what did you do? What was your call to action all of a sudden? Because this thing works so well, I got an alert on my phone, this hive is light, or there was a spike. They're swarming. Right, so what are you going to do? Stop it? No? Well, now you have data. So now you know exactly when they swarmed? I don't know. I have so many questions. My questions don't run deep enough for me to spend that kind of money to put a scale on my hive. Now, if you want to go around and weigh things, I don't know. If you're going to ship stuff, you need to know what your hives are going to weigh. You have to plan for shipping. I don't know. Tell me why it's important to know. And if you know something besides the Broodminder. The Broodminder scale has been around for years. A lot of university studies use it. Penn State bought a whole pile of them. But again, they're data crunchers. They need that exact data to back up, what they think is going to happen. So, and then to put that in their study. So I want to know, how are you benefiting from it? If you do these, if you use them, if there's another company that makes another scale, there's another mechanical scale or something like that you have found valuable, write about it. I'd like to look into that. So please put that down in the comments section. And I don't mean to be negative about it because I'm not against tech. I use tech on a lot of things. I think it can be really good. I just, I want to save you money in this case, which is rare for me. I know you're probably sitting there shocked right now that I'm trying to talk you out of spending a bunch of money. Here's the fluff section because we're done. We're wrapping up now on this frozen Friday of December, right? So I want you to pay attention to your bees. I don't know where you're located right now, but if you're in the Northeast, storms are everywhere. Winter storms are zipping in. The weather is dynamic. So I haven't had to do anything with my bees. You would think it'd be a big deal, but not one hive blew over in those high winds. I didn't have to go out there and do a rescue, by the way. If you need to pull on an emergency bee suit, did you know that there is an emergency bee suit? It's being sold by Better Bee, and it's called the emergency, it's the pullover bee suit or something. The whole thing would fit in your glove compartment, and you could unravel it. And then I'm going to put a link to that down in the video description. But like if you were driving out to look at a bee yard and you don't have your whole bee suit with you because it's wintertime and you're drinking your hot chocolate and all that stuff, and you're not ready to do any work, you're just checking up on things to make sure a bear hasn't been out there or something like that, nobody stole your stuff, the electric fence is good, which it isn't right now with all the deep snow. Electric fences are garbage right now. Anyway, what if you had to pull on an emergency pullover suit? It's like $25, and you can pull it on and it covers your whole head in a veil. It's long sleeve, you put your thumbs in it and everything else. You could go out and do an emergency manipulation and not have to tow an entire bee suit around. I'm going to put a link. If you're looking for a gift for a beekeeper, a stocking stuffer, if you do that in your household, then the Better Bee emergency pullover, it wads back up. It's fun to take out because it's funny to me. Like it's a good joke. It's like, oh, look at the bees over there. And you open up this little pocket and you unzip it and the whole suit comes out. And it's just the top, of course. And but it is good if you're having to deal with something that you didn't expect. It's an on-the-go kind of bee suit. But can your bees fly out? We've got warm weather coming up here in the state of Pennsylvania. Obviously, again, different where you are. But Monday, coming right up, we're going to have the warmest day. And you know these forecasters, they're spot on. They're never wrong. It's going to be 46 degrees Fahrenheit. And the low is going to be 42, which means melting day and night. And in some cases, people have over 2 feet of snow on their roof. I think if you owned a gutter company, you're going to be in business come spring. But here's the thing. Your bees need to be able to fly out. So what you're going to be able to see is, come Monday, when you get this sudden warm-up, you're going to see bees doing cleansing flights. So this is a great chance to make sure that your landing boards are clear. Now, at other times, I wouldn't think it was that big a deal, but it's going to follow this warm trend. We're also going to have consistent 12 miles per hour winds, which is really good. Warm air and wind. We're going to get the snow off the roof. We're going to get the stuff down. And now I hope you're ready for some flooding that's about to happen in my neck of the woods. But I want you to clean off your entrances and make sure they're absolutely clear. And here's why. We're going to get, here in the Northeast, we're going to get more rain. We're going to get, the wind is going to be strong. It's going to transition to snow. And then we're going to get freezing temperatures. So let me tell you something that will potentially lock up your hive in a way that your bees cannot manage, and that's when it transitions to ice. It'll go straight from rain to snow to ice. And so if you haven't cleared it and you've got this big pack of snow on your landing board, as it melts down onto the landing board, turns to ice with the rain building while it's transitioning, you have an encapsulated beehive and potentially suffocating bees inside, all because you couldn't be bothered to put down your hot chocolate and get out there and poke a hole in the entrance for your bees. So please do that. Let's see, and this will be your chance too to pop the top and look at your fondant, if you've got that on. If you've got dry sugar, check it, see if it's full, because this is your chance. You don't have to get down in the hive. I don't want you to get down inside the hive, because guess what? If they're dead, they're dead. There's nothing you're going to do about it. Please don't pop the inner cover and stuff like that. You're just assessing feed, and you're making sure that they have what they need. So, and by Wednesday, so start from Monday to Wednesday, we're not going to have freezing, but Wednesday night, it's going to drop to freezing temps in the state of Pennsylvania, northwest part of the state. Your roof snow is also going to get super wet, super heavy, so maybe get some of that off if you can do it. Leave snow around the hive. So again, it's around the sides of the hive because we like that. It's a good insulator and everything else. Monday, you're going to get a chance to observe cleansing flights. So I already said that. You also want to look to see when they're landing in the snow, are they turning it tan or brown and stuff like that. So these are things that you will want to make notes in your bee log. So you're going to write down bees that were actively doing cleansing flights. It's a great chance to listen to your hives. Put your head right up against it and hear the humming, because they can be so quiet in the state of torpor that you don't hear anything. They can seem dead. If you think they're dead, please don't pull it apart to find out and get confirmation, because having that knowledge right now in December does not help you. We're not in a position to cycle it out, clean it up, do an autopsy, but you are in a great position to be that final nail in their coffin if you open it up, just because you had to know and you open up a full cluster of bees right there and expose them to rain and cold and everything else just because you're a person and you want to know what's going on. Don't open any of the hives. Just do everything you can to facilitate their survival this winter. Check the alignment of your boxes, leveling, stuff like that. And so in closing, I want to say is, of course, check your straps, stuff like that. Make sure everything is secure. If you're in my neck of the woods and nothing blew over, I think I'm pretty solid for the whole winter here because my bees took it. The hives handle it. I don't know what the bees are doing in there. They're probably not happy. Submit your topics, questions that you might have right down in the comment section of this video. So that's pretty much it. Thanks a lot for being here. I hope that you learned one new thing, and if not, I don't know what to tell you. Just have a fantastic weekend with your bees. I hope things are going well for you wherever you are. We have more snow coming all weekend. Thanks for watching.